The most powerful steam locomotive ever built roars back to life in 1919. But something is missing. There's no coal in the tender, no fireman shoveling, no black smoke plume. The machine is running on something else entirely. In May 2019, Union Pacific Big Boy 4014 moved under its own power for the first time in nearly 60 years. To the thousands of spectators lining the tracks in Cheyenne, Wyoming, the sight was unmistakable. A 1.2 million pound mountain climbing giant. Yet as the locomotive accelerated, the expected sensory markers of the steam era were absent. The massive tender carried no coal. There was no fireman laboring over a shovel, and no mechanical stoker clattering in the cab. Instead of the heavy, dark column of coal smoke historically associated with these engines, the stack emitted a light, clean exhaust. The world's largest operational steam locomotive was running entirely on oil. This change introduces a stark operational contrast. Oil is controlled with a valve. Coal is conquered by a machine. It leaves a central question. Does changing the fuel compromise the machine's authenticity? Or is it the only way to keep the big boy alive? Union Pacific 4014 holds the title of the world's largest operating steam locomotive. Built by the American Locomotive Company, or ALCO, in November 1941, this massive machine was designed for a single, brutal industrial mission: hauling heavy freight trains over the rugged terrain of Wyoming's Sherman Hill. Before its arrival, moving heavy tonnage over this grueling corridor required multiple locomotives coupled together, which slowed operations and increased labor costs. The Big Boy was engineered to eliminate these helper engines entirely, conquering the steep 1.55% grade as a single, self-contained powerhouse. To achieve this, ALCO utilized an articulated design with a 4884 wheel arrangement. In railroad terms, an articulated locomotive features a hinged frame, allowing a massive boiler to bend and negotiate tight mountain curves that would otherwise derail a rigid engine of this size. The 4884 designation describes the physical layout of the wheels. At the front, a four-wheel leading truck guides the locomotive into curves. Behind it sit two completely independent sets of 8 driving wheels, each set powered by its own pair of steam cylinders. Finally, a four-wheel trailing truck supports the massive weight of the firebox at the rear. The physical scale of this machinery is unprecedented. The locomotive itself measures 132 feet in length. When fully loaded with water and fuel, the combined weight of the engine and tender reaches approximately 1.2 million pounds. This immense weight rests on 68-inch driving wheels, producing a monumental 135,375 pounds of tractive effort. The Big Boy was the absolute zenith of American heavy steam design, built to keep transcontinental freight moving at speeds up to 80 miles per hour through some of the most challenging railroad territory in North America. To generate over 135,000 pounds of tractive effort, the Big Boy required a furnace of immense proportions. At the heart of this system was a firebox containing a great area of exactly 150 square feet, a space roughly the size of a standard domestic bedroom. This firebox contributed nearly 600 square feet of heating surface to the boiler. Beneath these heavy cast iron grates sat the ash pan, designed to collect the massive volume of spent fuel and waste produced during combustion. Under maximum demand, as the locomotive fought the steep grades of Sherman Hill, its hunger was insatiable, consuming between 10 and 12 short tons of coal every single hour. No human being could move fuel at that rate with a hand shovel. To solve this physical limitation, a LCO equipped the Big Boy with a steam-driven mechanical stoker. This system functioned as a heavy-duty conveyor and auger. Deep inside the tender, a crushing plate broke down large chunks of coal, which were then drawn forward by a rotating steel screw through a trough under the cab floor. Once inside the firebox, high-pressure steam jets blasted the crushed coal across the grates, distributing the fuel evenly to maintain a uniform temperature of over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Operating this massive machinery required immense skill from the coal-era fireman. Far from a simple laborer, the fireman was a highly trained technician. He stood in a noisy, vibrating cab, constantly adjusting the speed of the stoker engine, fine-tuning the steam jets to prevent cold spots on the grates, and closely monitoring the boiler water levels. A single mistake could cause coal to pile up unevenly, forming hard crusts known as clinkers that choked the draft and robbed the locomotive of its steam pressure. The fireman's eyes never left the pressure gauges or the blinding glare of the firebox peephole, manually balancing a complex mechanical ecosystem to keep the transcontinental freight moving. The era of the coal-fired giants ended with a quiet efficiency. By the late 1950s, the rumble of steam across Sherman Hill was fading, replaced by the steady thrum of multi-unit diesel locomotives. Diesels required no water stops, no massive coaling towers, and far less maintenance, making the complex steam network obsolete almost overnight. Union Pacific retired its big boy fleet by the early 1960s. For number 4014, active service concluded on July 21, 1959, after logging more than 1 million miles of heavy freight duty. Instead of meeting the scrapper's torch, 4014 was selected for preservation. In December 1961, Union Pacific donated the locomotive to the Southern California chapter of the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society. Placed on static display at the Fairplex in Pomona, California, the engine became a monument to a departed era. For 51 years, 4014 sat under the California sun, silent and immobile. Its mechanical stoker remained still. Its firebox, once burning at 2,000 degrees, grew cold. Static display preserved the physical structure of the machine, but stripped away its purpose, transforming a mountain-climbing powerhouse into a quiet park exhibit. Then, in March 2013, Union Pacific announced plans to reacquire 4014. The railroad envisioned a living piece of heritage to celebrate the Transcontinental Railroad's upcoming anniversary. In early 2014, crews prepared the giant for a long tow back to the steam shop in Cheyenne, Wyoming, as the locomotive finally rolled out of the museum grounds on temporary tracks. It was a massive, rusted survivor of a forgotten age. Yet returning this mechanical giant to steam after half a century meant confronting a modern world where the coal infrastructure of 1941 was entirely gone. A fundamental question hung over the restoration. What kind of machine would return? In 1913, the restoration team at the Cheyenne Steam Shop began a complete disassembly of the locomotive. Over the next 6 years, technicians systematically rebuilt the boiler, replacing stay bolts and reflanging firebox sheets, while remachining the massive wheel sets and straightening the heavy frame. This was not a cosmetic project designed to produce a static museum exhibit. The objective was a fully operational locomotive capable of traversing modern rail corridors under its own power. To achieve this, the team had to address a fundamental conflict between historical preservation and practical mechanics. In 2016, Union Pacific made the decision to change the fuel configuration of 4014. The original coal-firing architecture, including the steam-driven mechanical stoker, the grates, and the ash pan, was completely removed from the firebox. In its place, engineers fabricated and installed a 3/8-inch thick steel fire pan lined with high-temperature refractory brick. They fitted a custom-designed Venturi-type oil burner at the front of the firebox, which used steam to atomize the fuel into a fine spray. The coal bunker inside the massive tender was rebuilt into an insulated fuel tank designed to carry 6,000 gallons of fuel oil, gravity-fed directly to the burner. This mechanical overhaul was accompanied by modern safety upgrades. The team installed positive train control, making 4014 the first mainline steam locomotive equipped with the active GPS-based safety network required on 21st century Class I railroads. The conversion represented a calculated departure from the locomotive's original 1941 blueprints. Retaining the coal-fired configuration would have preserved the exact mechanical identity of the engine as built by Alco, but it would have severely limited where and when the locomotive could operate. The restoration team prioritized active utility over static historical accuracy. They engineered a machine built to run, accepting the reality that modern mainline operations would test the viability of this fuel choice under a new set of real-world constraints. Coal itself has not vanished from the United States. Millions of tons are still mined and transported across the rail network every year. The bottleneck is the complete extinction of the massive industrial system required to service a coal-burning locomotive. In 1941, Union Pacific maintained a highly specialized network of towering coaling docks, overhead gravity chutes, water treatment plants, and ash dump pits spaced systematically along its main lines. Facilities like the massive coaling stations in Ogden, Utah, and Cheyenne, Wyoming, could dump 10 tons of fuel into a tender in 60 seconds. Specialized terminal crews stood ready at every division point to manage the fuel and handle the physical demands of servicing. Today, that entire physical and human infrastructure has been dismantled, repurposed, or left to decay. The steam-era operating ecosystem has ceased to exist. A locomotive of this scale cannot burn standard, low-grade coal. The Big Boy's firebox was engineered to consume a specific high-volatile bituminous coal, yielding 13,500 British thermal units per pound with less than 1% sulfur. Modern excursion routes do not reliably access the regions where this high-grade fuel is mined, and local terminals no longer stock it. Lower-grade thermal coal fails to generate the heat required to maintain 300 pounds of steam pressure under load. While Union Pacific could transport the correct coal to key locations using trucks and front-end loaders, this ad hoc method introduces severe logistical penalties. Mobile loading setups require designated staging yards, heavy machinery, and extra support crews. This temporary supply chain increases operating costs, restricts routing choices, and forces rigid, slow-moving schedules on a modern railroad network. Under heavy load, a coal-fired steam locomotive behaves like a mobile furnace, venting directly into the atmosphere. The violent draft created by exhaust steam blasts through the firebox, carrying thousands of incandescent particles of unburned coal out of the stack. These hot cinders can be projected up to 30 feet from the tracks. In the arid, timber-rich environments of the western United States, these airborne embers present an immediate threat. A single stray cinder landing in dry line-side brush can ignite a catastrophic wildfire, a danger illustrated by the 1996 Boulder Canyon fire started by a heritage coal locomotive. This physical hazard translates into modern regulatory and financial barriers. State fire safety laws in California, Arizona, and Colorado prohibit open flame emissions in high-danger zones during dry summer months, effectively banning coal excursions. Host railroads and municipal fire authorities routinely deny track access when weather conditions elevate regional fire danger. Furthermore, carrying the liability of a potential wildfire exposes the heritage program to massive financial risk. Insurance underwriters impose heavy premium surcharges on coal-fired operations. Converting 4014 to oil reduced these insurance premiums by an estimated 35%. Switching to oil removes the stream of solid, glowing cinders entirely, bypassing the primary mechanism of line-side ignition. However, this does not make steam operations entirely risk-free. The massive boiler still generates intense, radiant heat, and open flame combustion occurs inside the firepan. Even running on oil, the Big Boy must occasionally navigate route closures and scheduling changes during active fire seasons. Yet the conversion remains the only practical way to secure operational access to the Western Rail network. Inside the cab of the 4014, the transition from coal to oil reshapes the daily reality of the crew. In the coal era, the fireman operated at the center of a complex mechanical storm. To keep the firebox fed, he did not just shovel fuel. He managed a steam-driven conveyor system, adjusted high-pressure steam jets to distribute the coal, and constantly monitored the draft and boiler pressure. A lapse in attention meant uneven heating, choking the fire, and stealing the locomotive's power. It was a demanding battle of physical endurance and technical calculation. With the oil conversion, this mechanical burden disappears. The massive stoker machinery, the heavy grates, and the constant physical struggle to feed the furnace are entirely gone. Instead, the fireman controls the heat using fuel valves and atomizing steam, carefully adjusting the flow to match the locomotive's immediate power demands. The change crystallizes the operational reality of the modern big boy. Oil is a valve, coal is a machine. Yet, this simplified fueling does not mean the big boy can be run by a single person. Modern Union Pacific excursions require a dedicated crew of 4 people in the cab at all times, consisting of an engineer, a fireman, a conductor, and a machinist. Managing a boiler pressurized to 300 pounds per square inch and an articulated frame still demands constant vigilance. The fireman must continuously monitor the water levels, watch the burner flame, and adjust the atomizing steam to prevent thick smoke. While the heavy physical labor has been lifted, the cognitive demands of steam operation remain. The skill of the modern crew is not diminished. It is simply redirected from fighting the fuel to mastering the machine. When a coal-fired locomotive completes its run, the work of servicing the firebox begins. As coal burns, it leaves behind a massive volume of solid ash that falls through the grates into the hopper below. More problematic are clinkers, fused masses of melted ash, and mineral impurities that harden into heavy, glass-like slag. These clinkers block the airflow through the grates, suffocating the fire and robbing the boiler of draft. Clearing them requires terminal crews to manually break up the slag and shake the grates, dumping hundreds of pounds of hot residue into specialized wet ash pan disposal pits. Historically, railroads maintained dedicated disposal facilities at every division point to manage this hazardous waste. Today, these facilities are completely gone. On a modern excursion, managing tons of hot ash and clinkers without specialized ground infrastructure would stall operations, turning every service stop into an extensive bottleneck. Converting to oil bypasses this solid residue burden entirely. There is no ash pan to empty, no clinkers to break, and no firebox grates to clean. The physical turnaround time at terminal stops drops from nearly an hour to a brief 15 minutes, comparable to servicing a modern diesel. Yet this change does not eliminate the remaining physical realities of maintaining a steam giant. The locomotive still requires thousands of gallons of water, detailed mechanical inspections, and manual grease gun lubrication of the driving gear at every stop. Oil simply removes the dirtiest, most time-consuming bottleneck of the servicing cycle, allowing the big boy to keep pace with the tight schedules of a modern rail network. Union Pacific's choice to run the restored big boy on oil was not a sudden mechanical detour, but the continuation of a long-standing corporate practice. The railroad already possessed a deep institutional playbook for oil-burning steam. In 1946, Union Pacific converted its entire FEF3 class of 484 locomotives, including the celebrated number 844, to burn heavy fuel oil, establishing a baseline for high-speed passenger operations. Decades later, in 1990, the Heritage Program applied these lessons to Challenger number 3985, converting the massive articulated locomotive from coal to oil to eliminate line-side fire hazards on modern excursion routes. These successful conversions provided the Cheyenne steam crew with decades of practical data on draft arrangements, fuel preheating circuits, and burner designs. When the team began planning the return of 4014 in 2013, they had a proven in-house template. They could duplicate the gravity-fed burner systems and cab controls that had kept 844 and 3985 running reliably for years, avoiding the need for unproven improvisations. Yet precedent only reduced uncertainty. It did not guarantee success on a giant scale. A big boy is not simply a slightly larger challenger. With a firebox measuring over 19 feet long and a grate area of 150 square feet, nearly 40% larger than the challengers, the big boy presented a different class of thermodynamic challenges. Scaling up the burner design risked creating uneven heat patterns inside the massive boiler. The team had to determine if the oil-burning technology that succeeded on smaller locomotives could safely satisfy the massive appetite of the world's largest steam engine. In December 1946, during a nationwide coal miners' strike, Union Pacific attempted a temporary conversion of Big Boy 4005 to burn oil. The railroad's mechanical department removed the stoker and grates, installing a single large oil burner at the back of the massive firebox. This early system relied on a simple mechanical atomizer that struggled to distribute heat evenly across the grate area of 150 square feet. With a firebox measuring over 19 feet long, the single flame proved too concentrated, creating severe thermal stresses on the crown sheet and threatening to distort the boiler. During its 14-month trial, Big Boy 4005 suffered from highly unstable combustion, particularly at low speeds. The lack of precise fuel-air mixing produced heavy black smoke and rapid burner fouling. Unable to solve these thermodynamic challenges, Union Pacific halted the experiment and reverted the locomotive to coal in March 1948. When engineers designed the modern conversion of Big Boy 4014, they completely redesigned the combustion environment to avoid the structural failures of Big Boy 4005. Instead of a single, concentrated burner, the modern restoration uses a custom-designed Venturi-type burner, often called a Weir burner. This system forces a stream of steam through a Venturi casting, drawing a thin film of oil across a cast iron channel to create a highly atomized, even spray. The firebox interior was also heavily modified. The grates were replaced with a steel fire pan 3/8 of an inch thick, lined with high-temperature refractory brick. This brick lining includes a specialized flash wall designed to absorb peak temperatures and distribute the intense radiant heat evenly across the firebox, protecting the crown sheet from localized thermal shock. A variable area damper beneath the fire pan allows the fireman to adjust secondary air intake, which combines with precise valves in the cab to deliver stable combustion and consistent boiler pressure. The modern success of Big Boy 4014 relies on this complete technical redesign, proving that operating the world's largest steam engine on oil required far more than simply swapping the fuel. The transition to oil leaves an emotional cost. For generations, a coal-burning Big Boy was defined by a violent assault on the Wyoming sky. Today, the thick, dark column of coal smoke, heavy with soot and glowing cinders, is replaced by a thin, hazy plume of vapor that quickly dissipates. Gone, too, is the rhythmic clatter of the mechanical stoker drawing coal beneath the cab floor, a sound that historically scored every mountain climb. The blinding glare of the open grates is replaced by the muffled, hollow hiss of an oil burner behind steel fire pan doors. For the purist, this represents a legitimate sensory loss, altering how the engine looks, sounds, and breathes. Even the fireman's role, once a physical duel with a mechanical beast, is now a quiet task of managing valves and monitoring gauges. Yet this sensory departure preserves the locomotive's core identity. While purists feel the loss of the original coal-era experience, the machine remains a genuine fire-breathing survivor. It is simply the quiet compromise required to keep the world's largest steam giant moving. On May 4th, 2019, Big Boy 4014 backed out of the Cheyenne steam shop under its own power, delivering the concrete outcome of years of labor. The oil conversion transformed a silent, weather-worn monument at the Pomona Fairgrounds into a mobile ambassador of American industrial history. Because it burns liquid fuel, the locomotive is not restricted to a single closed loop or a museum track. Instead, it tours the modern transcontinental rail network, traversing dozens of states and bringing the raw power of steam directly to millions of people who would otherwise only see these giants in archival photographs. In an era when railroads strictly prohibit the wildfire risks associated with coal, this fuel choice is the passport that allows 4014 to run. Rather than sitting cold and silent inside a roundhouse, locked away from the public, the locomotive operates on active main lines, keeping pace with modern freight traffic. This continuous movement represents an active form of preservation. A static exhibit preserves the metal, but an operating engine preserves the experience, the kinetic energy, and the sensory reality of steam technology in action. For the crews who maintain 4014 and the public that gathers along the tracks, the value of the conversion lies in this physical presence. The choice was never between a coal-burning big boy and an oil-burning big boy. The real choice was between a modified, living machine traversing the country under its own steam and a perfectly authentic coal-fired artifact destined to remain forever cold and motionless on a display track. This stark reality poses a final question of what it truly means to preserve a machine. Authenticity in preservation is rarely a simple preservation of original material. For a steam locomotive, the question of what is genuine depends on the balance between form and function. Coal was the historically original fuel for which the big boy was designed. It dictated the physical construction of the grate area, the draft of the boiler, and the entire labor structure of the cab. By removing coal, Union Pacific altered the machine's sensory identity, replacing the heavy, dark exhaust, the rhythmic clack of the stoker, and the physical struggle of the fireman with the controlled hiss of an oil burner. To some, this mechanical change compromises the historical integrity of the engine itself. Yet another definition of authenticity exists, one centered on the original purpose of a machine. The big boy was never built to be a silent monument. It was engineered to exert monumental force, to boil water, and to pull heavy transcontinental freight. If preservation means maintaining unchanged material at the cost of operation, then keeping the locomotive coal-fired would relegate it to a display track. A coal-burning big boy in the 21st century is a machine destined to remain cold, locked away by wildfire liabilities, vanished infrastructure, and logistical impossibilities. The conversion to oil represents a trade-off between material accuracy and functional survival. While the fuel has changed, the locomotive still generates 300 pounds of steam pressure to drive its wheels. It works, it breathes, and it runs across the modern transcontinental rails. In the end, the ultimate act of preservation is keeping the machine alive, ensuring that the world's largest steam locomotive remains an active, roaring reality rather than a quiet memory of the past. Today, the big boy thunders across a continent that no longer supports its past. While we traded a piece of history's sensory soul, we saved its kinetic heart. Oil is a valve. Coal is a machine. In the modern world, that valve is the only key to the main line. We are left with a stark choice: preserve a silent monument or celebrate a living giant. Share your perspective in the comments below.